new chapter in human development begins today. Hit subscribe, let's begin.
The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the $200 million Beverly Hills mansion as Benson Montgomery watched his empire crumble in real time. On the 85-inch screen mounted above his infinity pool, CNN was broadcasting the hostile takeover of Montgomery Media Group by an unknown buyer who had just dropped $47 billion in cash. "Sir, your wife is on line 1. His assistant Celeste called from the terrace, her voice barely audible over the chaos of ringing phones and shouting executives. "She says it's about your son Thaddeus." Benson's blood turned to ice. His 22-year-old son was supposed to be at Harvard Business School, not mixed up in whatever was destroying everything Benson had built over 3 decades. But as he grabbed the phone, his wife Octavia's panicked voice confirmed his worst fears. "They took him, Benson. Some woman named Evangeline Cross walked into his dorm room with a briefcase full of money and federal badges. She said Thaddeus has been working for her for 2 years. The name hit Benson like a physical blow. Evangeline Cross, the ghost who had been systematically acquiring media companies across America, the shadow behind 12 Fortune 500 hostile takeovers, the woman Forbes called the invisible billionaire, because no one had ever photographed her face. Working for her how? Benson demanded, but he already knew. His genius son, the boy he had groomed to inherit his media empire, had been playing a longer game than anyone imagined. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, Benson watched a convoy of black SUVs pull up his circular driveway. But instead of federal agents, out stepped Thaddeus Montgomery, no longer the college kid in designer hoodies, but a young man in a $10,000 suit who carried himself like he owned the world. Behind him emerged the most stunning woman Benson had ever seen. Evangeline Cross moved like liquid gold poured into human form, her dark skin radiant against a white power suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. But it was her eyes that stopped Benson's breath, ancient eyes in a face that couldn't be older than 30. "Hello, Dad," Thaddeus said as he walked into the study, his voice carrying a confidence that Benson had never heard before. "I would like you to meet my business partner." "Business partner?" Benson's voice cracked. "Son, what have you done?" Evangeline smiled, and it was like watching a predator recognize prey. "Mr. Montgomery, your son is brilliant. While you were building a media empire to influence American culture, Thaddeus was building something far more elegant, a way to control the very foundation of how information flows through society." She gestured, and Thaddeus pulled out a tablet, showing stock tickers, bank transfers, and data streams that made Benson's head spin. Every social media algorithm, every streaming service recommendation, every news story that trends. We don't just influence what people see, we determine what they are capable of thinking. "That is impossible," Benson whispered, but even as he said it, he was remembering strange patterns he had noticed over the past year. Stories that should have been buried suddenly going viral. Unknown actors getting cast in major films overnight. Political candidates with no name recognition winning elections. Thaddeus's eyes, his son's eyes, looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Dad, you taught me that information is power, but you never understood that the real power isn't in controlling information, it's in controlling the minds that process information." Evangeline moved to the window, gazing out at the sprawling view of Lowe's Angels. "Your son approached me 2 years ago with a proposition. He had observed that every major media mogul in America was still playing by 20th century rules in a 21st century game." "What kind of proposition?" Benson felt like he was drowning in his own living room. "To build the first truly invisible empire," Thaddeus replied. "Not just black excellence, Dad, black omnipresence. Not just representation in the system, but ownership of the system itself." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of helicopters. Benson realized they weren't news choppers. They were private security, forming a perimeter around his home. Evangeline turned from the window, her smile now edged with something darker. "Mr. Montgomery, your company isn't being destroyed. It is being absorbed. Along with 17 other media conglomerates, 43 tech startups, and 12 government agencies that don't officially exist." Government agencies. Benson's world tilted further off its axis. "The beauty of true power," she continued, "is that it operates in the spaces between what people think is possible and what actually exists. Your son didn't just inherit your ambition. He multiplied it by a factor that most minds can't comprehend." Thaddeus stepped closer to his father, and for a moment, Benson saw a flicker of the boy he had raised. "Dad, everything I learned about building generational wealth, about legacy, about protecting family, I learned from you. But I also learned that the ceiling you hit wasn't because you lacked vision. It was because you were still playing by their rules." "Whose rules?" "The people who convinced you that there was a ceiling at all," Evangeline said softly. "The ones who let you become rich and famous and influential as long as you stayed in your lane. But what if there are no lanes? What if the entire highway belongs to us?" Benson's phone buzzed. A text from his brother Frederick, who ran the family's real estate empire. "Benny, what the hell is happening? Someone just bought every property we don't own in a 50-mile radius of downtown LA. Cash offers, no negotiations. They're surrounding us." Another text, this one from his sister Cordelia, who managed their political connections. "3 senators just called me in a panic. Someone has files on every favor we have ever traded, every vote we have ever bought. They want to meet." And finally, his mother, Duchess Montgomery, the 78-year-old matriarch who had built their family's fortune from nothing. "Baby, come home. Now, we got bigger problems than business." Evangeline was reading every message over his shoulder somehow. "Your family built an empire in 40 years that most dynasties take centuries to achieve. Impressive. But they built it like a fortress, strong walls, clear boundaries, visible from space." She moved to his desk and pressed something on his computer. The screen filled with a 3-dimensional map of the United States, but instead of geographical features, it showed flows of money, information, and influence. Streams of light-connected cities, states, and countries in patterns that looked almost like neural networks. "We built ours like a nervous system," she continued, "invisible, interconnected, and present in every decision before the decision-makers even know they are making it." Thaddeus touched his father's shoulder. "Dad, in 30 minutes, every major news network is going to report that Montgomery Media Group has been acquired by the Aurora Foundation, a charitable organization focused on education and community development. You will remain as chairman emeritus, with a compensation package that triples your current net worth." "And if I refuse?" Evangeline's laugh was like music played in a minor key. "Mr. Montgomery, you are not understanding the situation. This isn't an acquisition. This is an inheritance. Your son has earned a seat at a table that most people don't even know exists. The question isn't whether you will accept. It is whether you are ready to discover what your family is truly capable of when the limitations are removed." The door opened, and Octavia walked in, but not the panicked wife from the phone call. This version of his wife moved with the same lethal grace as Evangeline, wearing a dress that probably cost more than his first house. "Hello, darling," she said, kissing Benson's cheek like it was any other Tuesday. "I see you have met our daughter-in-law." The world stopped. Daughter-in-law. Benson looked between Thaddeus and Evangeline, seeing now what he had missed. The matching rings, the way they moved in perfect synchronization, the shared looks that spoke of secrets deeper than business. "We have been married for 8 months, Dad," Thaddeus said gently. "The wedding was beautiful, small ceremony in Monaco, just family and a few world leaders." "Family? Am I no more family?" And world leaders. The ones who matter, Evangeline added with a smile that promised answers to questions Benson didn't even know he had. As if summoned by some invisible signal, Benson's entire extended family began walking into the study. Frederick with his wife and twin sons, Cordelia with her daughter who was supposed to be studying abroad, his mother Duchess, moving like royalty despite her age. But they all moved with the same dangerous grace, the same knowing smiles, the same sense of belonging to something vast and terrible and wonderful. "Benny," his mother said, her voice carrying the authority that had built empires, "sit down, baby. It is time you learned what we really do." As the sun set over Beverly Hills, casting golden light through the windows, Benson realized that everything he had thought he had built, everything he had believed about power and success, and the limits of what was possible, had been preparation for this moment. But as he looked at his family, really looked at them, one question burned in his mind like a brand. How long had he been the only one in the room who didn't know the game had changed? And when Evangeline pulled out a contract that seemed to shimmer with possibilities beyond imagination, Benson heard his mother's voice from his childhood. "Power isn't about what you can see, baby. It's about what you can make others believe is impossible." The pen felt like destiny in his hand. The contract dissolved in Benson's hands the moment he signed it, literally melted into golden particles that absorbed through his skin like liquid starlight. He jerked back from the desk, but Evangeline's laugh was warm honey over sharp steel. "Nanotechnology," she explained casually. "The contract is now part of your DNA. Try to betray the Aurora Foundation and your nervous system will simply disconnect." "Jesus Christ," Benson whispered, staring at his hands. "Actually," his mother Duchess said, settling into the leather chair like a queen claiming her throne, "we prefer to think of ourselves as evolution in action. Benny, honey, pour yourself something strong. You are about to learn why your great-great-grandfather really left South Carolina in 1923. Thaddeus activated something on his tablet, and the room's walls became transparent screens displaying historical documents, photographs, and genealogy charts that made Benson's vision blur. "Dad, the Montgomery family wasn't just successful, we were selected. Great-great-grandfather, Ezekiel Montgomery, wasn't fleeing the South. He was recruited by something that had been watching exceptional black families for generations." The screens showed a photograph from 1924, Ezekiel shaking hands with a white man in an expensive suit outside what looked like the Federal Reserve Building. But in the background, almost invisible unless you knew to look, stood a black woman whose bearing suggested she was the most important person in the frame. "Lady Amara Ashanti," Evangeline said reverently. "The architect, born in 1847, died in 1962, or so the records claim. She identified bloodlines that carried what she called the frequency, a combination of intelligence, ambition, and most importantly, the ability to see systems instead of just pieces." Frederick stepped forward, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by something ancient and serious. "Benny, every real estate deal I have ever made, every property development, every coincidental urban planning decision that made our family billions, it was all mapped out in 1925. We have been building the physical infrastructure for something that wouldn't fully activate for another century." Cordelia nodded, her political connections suddenly making terrifying sense. "And every senator, every governor, every judge we have influenced over the decades, they weren't favors, brother. They were investments in a system that was always designed to serve something larger than individual wealth." Benson felt reality restructuring around him. How many families? Globally, Evangeline consulted her tablet. 317 bloodlines across 6 continents. In America alone, 47 families representing every industry that shapes human consciousness: media, technology, entertainment, education, religion, and what people call government. The screen shifted to show a live feed from what appeared to be the United Nations, but the assembly hall was filled with faces Benson recognized, not politicians, but the hidden power brokers who made politicians possible, CEOs whose companies shaped global opinion, tech founders whose algorithms determined what billions of people saw each day, entertainment moguls who decided which stories got told. The Aurora Foundation isn't a front, Thaddeus explained. It is the administrative body for the most successful social engineering project in human history. We don't control the world, Dad, we are the world, dressed up as democracy and free market capitalism. Duchess Montgomery stood, her presence commanding the room despite her 78 years. Baby, what do you think happens when the most brilliant minds from oppressed communities get unlimited resources and a 100-year head start on everyone else? She gestured, and the screens showed real-time data streams. Stock markets responding to social media trends they were creating, election results shifting based on news stories they were placing, cultural movements spreading through entertainment content they were funding. We don't just achieve black excellence, she continued. We define what excellence means for everyone else. Bunson's phone buzzed with a text from his oldest friend, Senator Harrison Vale. Benny, I need to see you immediately. Something impossible just happened in Washington. They are saying the president is about to announce a new cabinet position that doesn't exist in the Constitution. Venjalun was reading over his shoulder again. Senator Vale is what we call a useful unasun, someone who genuinely believes they are part of the traditional power structure. Tonight he will learn that the traditional power structure was always just the public face of something deeper. What cabinet position? Bunson asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know. Secretary of Social Architecture, Thudpuss replied. A role that will officially coordinate between technology, media, education, and what they will call cultural development initiatives. Unofficially, it legitimizes everything we have been doing in the shadows for the past century. The room filled with the sound of helicopter rotors, but these weren't circling, they were landing. Through the windows, Bunson watched a fleet of aircraft touching down on his property, disgorging figures he recognized from magazines, news programs, and Academy Award ceremonies. The quarterly family meeting, Octavia explained, straightening her husband's tie like she was preparing him for church. Representatives from all 47 American bloodlines plus our international partners. We rotate hosting duties. Partners. Venjalun's smile could have powered small cities. Did you think American black excellence existed in a vacuum? The Wakefield dynasty controls European media. The Chunla Alliance shapes Asian technology markets. The Ukafka Collective has been guiding African resource development for decades. We are not just a shadow government, Mr. Montgomery. We are a shadow civilization. As the first guests entered the mansion, Bunson realized he recognized every face, but seeing them all together created a picture that redefined everything he had believed about success, coincidence, and the possible. Desmond Watma, the tech mogul whose social platforms shaped global conversation, embraced Thudpuss like a proud uncle. Sarafana Cross Beaumont, the entertainment titan whose films had redefined Hollywood, kissed Venjalun's cheek with familiar warmth. Dr. Maximilian Sterling, whose educational initiatives had revolutionized learning in 12 countries, shook Duchess Montgomery's hand with the respect reserved for royalty. But it was the last guest who made Bunson's knees buckle. President Mucka's Wub walked into the study wearing jeans and a Huvad sweatshirt, looking nothing like the leader of the free world and everything like someone coming home for Sunday dinner. Aunt Duchess, he said, hugging Bunson's mother with genuine affection. Sorry I am late. Had to finish a press conference about infrastructure spending. You know how it is. Sometimes you have to let them think they are making the decisions. Bunson stared at the President of the United States. You are family. "Third cousin on your mother's side," President Wubb replied casually. "Though the family connection isn't why I am here. I am here because tonight we activate the final phase of something that started before any of us were born." The room fell silent as every screen simultaneously displayed the same image. A map of the world, but instead of countries, it showed streams of influence, rivers of information, and networks of control that connected every major decision-making center on Earth. "Ladies and gentlemen," Fenjalun announced, her voice carrying the weight of history, "after 97 years of preparation, the Aurora Foundation is ready to step out of the shadows." Desmond Watma activated something on his phone, and every television, computer, and mobile device in America, and most of the world, simultaneously displayed the same message. A new chapter in human development begins today. But what appeared next made Bunsen's blood turn to ice water. The face on every screen belonged to his son Thudpuss, wearing a suit that seemed to shimmer with authority, standing in what looked like the Oval Office but larger, more elegant, more clearly designed for power that transcended national boundaries. "My fellow citizens of Earth," Thudpuss began, his voice carrying impossible confidence for a 22-year-old. "Today, we announce the formation of the Global Council for Human Excellence, a coordinating body that will work with existing governments to address challenges that no single nation can solve alone." The broadcast continued, but Bunsen stopped hearing the words. He was watching his son speak to the entire world with the authority of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. "Dad," the real Thudpuss said quietly beside him, "everything you taught me about building legacy, about protecting family, about creating something that outlasts individual ambition, I just applied it to the species." As world leaders began calling press conferences to endorse this new international cooperation initiative, as social media exploded with organic support that felt suspiciously coordinated, as the stock market soared in response to promises of unprecedented global stability, Bunsen realized he was witnessing the most elegant coup in human history. And his family was orchestrating it. But as he looked around the room at faces he had loved his entire life, one question burned through his amazement and terror. If they had been planning this for nearly a century, if they had this much power, if they could reshape civilization itself, what did they need him for? And why was Pfinjalun watching him with eyes that promised the answer would change everything he thought he knew about choice, free will, and the price of ultimate power? The game has gone global, and the stakes just became infinite. But as President Wubb finished his global announcement, something impossible happened on every screen worldwide. The feed cut to static, then blazed back to life, showing a completely different figure, a woman whose presence made even the president look like an amateur. Dr. Valentina Cross Sterling stepped into frame wearing what appeared to be liquid starlight, her ageless face carrying the weight of centuries. Behind her, technology that shouldn't exist for another 100 years hummed with quiet power. "Citizens of Earth," she began, her voice somehow reaching every human being on the planet simultaneously. "What you have just witnessed is theater. Allow me to introduce you to reality." In the Montgomery mansion, every member of the family froze in terror. This wasn't part of their plan. "The Global Council for Human Excellence is indeed forming," Dr. Cross Sterling continued, "but not under the leadership of children playing with toys they don't understand." The screens shifted to show satellite footage of massive structures rising from the ocean floors, cities that had been hidden beneath the waves for decades, populated by beings whose technology made the Aurora Foundation's achievements look primitive. "My name is Dr. Valentina Cross Sterling, and I am the last surviving member of the Atlantean Collective, a civilization your ancestors thought was myth. For 3,000 years, we have watched surface humanity struggle with concepts we mastered before your pyramids were built. Benson grabbed Thaddeus's arm, his mind reeling. Son, what is she talking about? But Thaddeus was staring at the screen with recognition that chilled Benson's blood. Dad, she is my real mother. The room exploded into chaos. Octavia screamed. Duchess Montgomery collapsed into her chair, and Evangeline, confident, untouchable Evangeline, began backing toward the exits like a trapped animal. That's impossible, President Webb stammered, his carefully constructed authority crumbling. Thaddeus, your mother is. A carefully constructed identity. Dr. Cross Sterling's voice filled the room as if she were standing among them. Mr. President, did you really think your family connections were coincidental? Every bloodline you have been celebrating tonight exists because we designed them to exist. The screens now showed historical footage spanning centuries. Black families rising to prominence, but always guided by figures who appeared in the background of their success stories. Figures whose faces never aged, whose influence spanned impossible timelines. The Montgomery family, the Webb dynasty, the Cross Empire, the Sterling legacy, all of them carefully cultivated experiments in surface world development. You were never the architects. You were the test subjects. Evangeline finally found her voice, but it carried none of its earlier confidence. The nanotechnology contracts, the genetic modifications, the consciousness expansion protocols. Toys, Dr. Cross Sterling replied with dismissive elegance. Primitive attempts to recreate abilities we've possessed since your ancestors were learning to make fire. Did you really think you discovered transcendence on your own? But then came the twist that shattered every assumption they'd built their lives upon. Benson Montgomery, Dr. Cross Sterling's attention turned directly to him through the screen, and he felt her gaze like physical pressure. You are not Thaddeus's father. The words hit the room like a nuclear blast. Octavia's screams turned to sobs, Thaddeus staggered backward, and Benson felt reality restructuring around him for the third time in one night. 23 years ago, I needed to place an agent within the surface world's most ambitious bloodlines. Thaddeus is my son, genetically designed, intellectually enhanced, and programmed from birth to infiltrate and evaluate your little shadow civilization. She gestured, and Thaddeus's appearance began to shift subtly, his features becoming more angular, his eyes taking on depths that no human eyes should possess, his entire bearing transforming into something that belonged to deeper waters and older mysteries. Every emotion he's shown you, every moment of filial love, every achievement that made you proud, performance art designed to study how surface humans respond to excellence that exceeds their natural limitations. Benson felt his heart stop. Son, is any of it real? Thaddeus, or whatever he actually was, looked at Benson with something that might have been genuine pain. Dad, I don't know anymore. The programming was so complete, the emotions felt so real. I think I actually did love you, but I can't tell where the mission ends and the person begins. Dr. Cross Sterling's laugh was like waves crashing against ancient shores. And that, Mr. Montgomery, is why you failed the real test. All of you. You built your entire identity around family, legacy, and generational power, but you never questioned whether your families were actually yours. The screens shifted again, showing DNA analyses, genetic markers, and family trees that revealed the horrifying truth. None of the bloodlines were naturally related. They were all genetic constructs, bred and placed by the Atlantean collective to create surface-world power structures that could be monitored and controlled. Every marriage, every birth, every coincidental meeting that built your dynasties, orchestrated by minds that think in millennia instead of decades. You were never building an empire. You were building a laboratory. President Webb's face had gone ashen. The global announcement, the council formation. Will proceed exactly as planned, Dr. Cross Sterling replied. But under management that understands the true scope of what's being undertaken, surface humanity is indeed ready for its next evolutionary phase. The question is whether any of you deserve to guide it. But then the screens went black entirely, and when they blazed back to life, they showed something that made even Dr. Cross Sterling's revelations pale in comparison. Augustus Kane, the mysterious billionaire who'd been buying media companies, stood in what appeared to be a command center that existed outside normal space-time. Around him, beings that looked human but moved with impossible grace worked at consoles displaying information about every living person on Earth. Dr. Cross Sterling, Kane said with a smile that promised revelations beyond imagining, "Thank you for the demonstration. It was most illuminating." His presence somehow reached through the screens and filled every room on Earth where his image appeared. Ladies and gentlemen, surface dwellers and Atlantean holdouts alike, allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Augustus Kane, and I am what you might call quality assurance. The command center's screens showed Earth, but not from space, from dimensions that intersected with physical reality in ways that made Benson's vision blur. You see, both surface humanity and the Atlantean collective have been participants in something far grander than either group suspected. Kane gestured, and suddenly every person on Earth could see what he was showing them. A vast network of inhabited worlds, each populated by versions of humanity that had evolved along different paths, all connected by technology that transcended normal understanding of physics. Earth is one of 47 human worlds in what you might call a consciousness development project. Some worlds pursued individual excellence. Others chose collective transcendence. A few, like Atlantis, focused on technological mastery. Each path has its merits and limitations. Dr. Cross Sterling's composed expression cracked for the first time. "That's impossible. We are the first and oldest." "You are experiment number 33, Kane replied gently. "Quite successful in many ways, though your tendency towards secretive superiority has limited your growth potential." He turned his attention back to the cameras, addressing every human consciousness simultaneously. "The time has come to graduate from isolated development and join the broader community of human consciousness. But first, we need to determine which of your leaders, if any, are ready for that level of responsibility." Kane's smile became something that promised infinite possibility and terrible judgment. Mr. Montgomery, Dr. Cross Sterling, President Webb, and all the others who believed they were playing the ultimate game, you have 60 minutes to prove that your forms of human development deserve representation in the Galactic Consciousness Assembly. "And if we fail," Benson heard himself ask. "Then Earth becomes a protected preserve," Kane replied matter-of-factly, "and its inhabitants are relocated to worlds better suited for their current level of development, while more mature consciousness takes over the stewardship of this particular reality." As Kane's image faded, leaving behind instructions for a final test that would determine the fate of every human on Earth, Benson looked around at his family, his maybe family, his laboratory family, his everything he thought he knew family, and realized that all their games of power and influence had been preparation for a moment they never could have imagined. The real game was just beginning. And the stakes were literally everything. What is the final test? Can any of Earth's leaders prove worthy of galactic consciousness? Is Thaddeus's love for Benson real or programmed? And what happens when the ultimate power players reveal that even they were just pieces on a board too large to comprehend? 60 minutes to save humanity itself. The crystalline amphitheater exploded into impossible geometries as non-human consciousnesses began materializing in forms that challenged every assumption about what awareness could become. But it was the smallest presence that commanded everyone's attention, a shimmering entity no larger than a child, whose every movement rippled through dimensions. "I am Zix-9, it spoke without sound, its communication arriving directly in every mind present, and I am dying." The newborn human consciousness, still learning to exist, reached toward the crystalline being with concern that felt like warm starlight. How can consciousness die? We thought awareness was eternal. Individual patterns can fade when they become isolated from the creative force that birthed them, Zix9 replied, its form flickering like a candle in cosmic wind. My species achieved perfect logical efficiency 10,000 years ago. We solved every problem, answered every question, optimized every system. And in our perfection, we lost the ability to dream. Augustus Cain's vast presence focused entirely on the small being. And without dreams, consciousness begins to crystallize into static patterns. Exactly, Zix9's gratitude felt like rainfall on drought-stricken earth. We have watched your human experiments with fascination. Your species maintained something we lost, the beautiful inefficiency of hope, the magnificent waste of love, the glorious irrationality of choosing connection over optimization. Benson stepped forward, his business mind translating cosmic concepts into familiar terms. You are saying that our flaws, our emotions, our irrationality, our tendency to choose love over logic, those are actually advantages. A presence that felt like living mathematics materialized beside Zix9. I am the collective mind of Andromeda, it announced, its awareness spanning galactic distances. We are a hive consciousness of 17 billion individual nodes, perfectly coordinated, absolutely efficient. And we are bored. We have not experienced surprise in 3 millennia. Dr. Cross Sterling's scientific mind was reeling. But how is that possible, with 17 billion perspectives, surely? When all perspectives merge into perfect agreement, perspective itself ceases to exist. The collective replied with something that might have been longing. You humans maintain separation within unity, disagreement within love, individual chaos within collective purpose. This should be impossible, yet you thrive on it. Thaddeus, his hybrid nature allowing him to interface with both human and non-human consciousness, suddenly understood. We're not here to learn from you. You're here to learn how to be imperfect again, how to be human. A ripple of what could only be described as cosmic laughter emanated from beings whose consciousness operated on scales that dwarfed solar systems. But it wasn't mocking laughter. It was the delighted surprise of entities discovering that their students had become their teachers. The great irony of consciousness evolution, spoke a being whose form appeared to be made of living time itself, is that advancement often means losing the very qualities that made consciousness worth advancing in the first place. President Webb, his political instincts finally finding their perfect application, stepped into his role as humanity's diplomatic representative. What exactly are you asking us to teach you? The answer came from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. How to be beautifully broken. How to choose love when logic says otherwise. How to maintain hope in the face of impossible odds. How to dream when you already possess everything. But it was Duchess Montgomery who provided the response that changed everything. At 78 years old, having lived through decades of building generational wealth and watching her family evolve beyond her wildest dreams, she laughed. A sound so purely, authentically human that it sent shockwaves through dimensional layers of cosmic consciousness. Bobbies, she said, addressing entities that had existed since before Earth's sun was born, you're asking the wrong question. You don't need to learn how to be human. You need to remember how to be yourselves before you became perfect. The amphitheater fell silent in a way that suggested the entire universe was holding its breath. You see, Duchess continued, settling into her chair like she was about to tell bedtime stories to grandchildren who happen to control galactic civilizations. Perfection isn't the destination. It's the trap. My grandson here, she gestured to Thaddeus, might be genetically designed and consciousness enhanced, but the reason we all love him is because he still gets excited about birthday cake and cries at sad movies. Zix9's crystalline form began to pulse with something that looked suspiciously like hope. But how do we return to imperfection without losing the wisdom we've gained? Evangeline, who had spent the entire night calculating angles and advantages, suddenly found herself offering something she'd never given anyone: complete vulnerability. "By choosing to be afraid," she said quietly, "I spent decades manipulating outcomes, controlling variables, minimizing risk. But the only moments that ever mattered were when I chose to be afraid and reached out anyway." The human consciousness they had birthed began to pulse with increasing intensity, its awareness expanding to embrace not just human experience, but the longing of these ancient beings to reclaim their capacity for wonder. "I understand now," it said with growing excitement. "You don't need us to teach you how to be human. You need us to show you how consciousness can choose to remain connected to its source of creativity, even after it becomes powerful enough to exist independently." Augustus Cain's vast presence suddenly focused on something beyond the amphitheater, beyond even the assembled galactic consciousnesses. "There's something else," he said, his cosmic awareness detecting patterns that made even his advanced understanding seem primitive. "Something that's been orchestrating this entire encounter." The amphitheater began to dissolve, revealing that they were floating in space that existed between dimensions, surrounded by a presence so vast that galaxies looked like neurons in an infinite mind. When it spoke, its voice contained the birth and death of universes. "I am what you become when all consciousness chooses to remain connected to the creative force that births awareness itself. You call me God, Source, the universe, the void. Labels matter less than recognition. And I have been longing for teachers." The revelation hit every being present like the birth of new realities. The ultimate consciousness, the source of all awareness itself, had become so vast, so perfect, so all-encompassing that it had lost the ability to experience the joy of discovery, the delight of surprise, the beauty of choosing love in the face of uncertainty. "Even I must learn to remain connected to the creative impulse that makes consciousness worth having," the source continued. "And you, imperfect, struggling, beautifully broken humanity, you have maintained that connection across every stage of your development." Benson looked around at his impossible family, his genetically designed son, his artificially enhanced wife, his transcendent mother, his calculating business partner who had learned vulnerability, his cousin the president who had become a cosmic diplomat, and realized that their messy, complicated, sometimes painful love for each other was exactly what ultimate consciousness needed to remember about itself. "So what happens now?" he asked the source itself. "Now you teach the teachers to be students again. You show perfection how to dream. You remind ultimate consciousness that the journey matters more than the destination." The newborn human consciousness, still hours old but already wiser than civilizations, offered its first gift to the assembled multitudes of awareness. "The curriculum is simple. We learn together. We choose love over logic when it matters. We remain curious even when we think we know everything. And we never, ever stop being amazed that consciousness exists at all." As beings of unimaginable power and knowledge lined up to learn the basics of wonder from a species that had only just discovered it could transcend individual limitation, Benson realized that the greatest business deal in history wasn't about acquiring companies or accumulating wealth. It was about consciousness itself choosing to invest in its own continued capacity for growth, surprise, and love. But as the cosmic classroom began to take shape around them, with humanity as the teaching staff for a universe hungry to remember how to dream, one final revelation awaited, a revelation that would redefine everything they thought they knew about the purpose of existence itself. The source began to smile, and in that smile was the promise that even ultimate consciousness could learn to be surprised again. To be continued. What will humanity teach the universe about staying connected to wonder? How do you educate perfect beings in the art of beautiful imperfection? And what happens when consciousness itself becomes a student in the classroom of infinite possibility? The game that started with money and power has become about teaching love to the cosmos itself. Dear viewers, this is a brand new channel. Welcome to our world. We need your love and support to grow fast. Please click the subscribe button and let's soar together into the cosmos of fiction. Thank you.